Joel Martinez never expected that stopping for gas at 3 in the morning would change his entire life. The girl huddled against the brick wall looked no older than his daughter Emma, shivering in clothes that had seen better days. He could have driven past, minded his own business like everyone else seemed to do. But something about her reminded him of vulnerability, of someone who needed help but was too proud to ask. He didn't know she was worth more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. He didn't know powerful people were searching for her across 3 states. He didn't know that one simple act of kindness would unlock doors he never dreamed existed. But as he grabbed that old blanket from his back seat and approached her with a cup of hot coffee, one question lingered in the cold night air. Could genuine compassion bridge the gap between a struggling single father and a world of unimaginable wealth? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button for more real, emotional, life-changing stories like this, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's gas station cast harsh shadows across the cracked asphalt as Joel Martinez pulled his battered Honda Civic up to pump number 3. The digital clock on his dashboard read 3:17 a.m., and exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd just finished his second job of the day, cleaning office buildings downtown, and his body ached in places he didn't know could ache. The single father of 2 had been running on fumes for months, juggling multiple jobs to keep his small family afloat after his wife Sarah had passed away from cancer 2 years prior. As he stepped out of his car, the bitter December wind cut through his thin work jacket, reminding him that winter in Chicago showed no mercy to anyone, regardless of their circumstances. Joel fumbled for his wallet, counting the crumpled bills and hoping he had enough for a half tank of gas to get through the next few days. Every dollar mattered when you're raising 2 kids on your own, when every grocery trip requires careful calculation, when the heating bill arrives like a monthly heart attack. That's when he saw her. Huddled against the brick wall of the gas station, barely visible in the shadows between the building and a rusted dumpster, was a girl who couldn't have been much older than his 16-year-old daughter Emma. She was curled into herself, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around her thin frame. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and even from a distance, Joel could see her body trembling against the cold. His first instinct was to look away, to mind his own business as he'd been taught to do in a city where minding your own business often meant survival. But something about the way she held herself, the defeated slump of her shoulders, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear into the wall itself, reminded him of his own daughter during those dark months after Sarah's diagnosis. It reminded him of vulnerability, of someone who needed help but had learned not to ask for it. Joel finished pumping his gas, his eyes drifting back to the girl every few seconds. She hadn't moved, hadn't even lifted her head to acknowledge the cars coming and going around her. Most people walked past her as if she were invisible, their eyes deliberately avoiding contact, their steps quickening as they hurried back to their warm cars and warm homes. He could have done the same. Should have done the same, really. He had his own problems, his own family to worry about. Emma and his 12-year-old son Marcus were probably fast asleep at home, safe in their beds, trusting that their father would always find a way to take care of them. The last thing he needed was to get involved with a homeless teenager who might have addiction problems, mental health issues, or worse. But as he climbed back into his car and turned the key in the ignition, Joel found himself unable to drive away. The image of the girl's trembling form was burned into his retinas, and he could hear Sarah's voice in his memory, reminding him of the countless times she'd insisted they help others, even when they could barely help themselves. "Kindness doesn't cost anything, Joel," she used to say. "But it can be worth everything to someone who needs it." With a heavy sigh, Joel turned off the engine and sat in his car for a long moment, wrestling with his conscience. The responsible thing would be to call the police or social services, let the professionals handle it. But he knew how overworked and understaffed those systems were, knew that one more homeless teenager would likely slip through the cracks or end up in a situation worse than sleeping against a gas station wall. Finally, he made his decision. Joel got out of his car and walked into the gas station, where the night clerk, a tired-looking man in his 50s, was reading a paperback novel behind bulletproof glass. "Excuse me," Joel said, approaching the counter. Could I get a large coffee, black, and maybe a couple of those wrapped sandwiches? The clerk looked up from his book, his expression suggesting he'd rather not be bothered with customers at this hour. Coffee's been sitting for a while, might be pretty strong. That's fine, Joel replied, pulling out his wallet again and hoping the $20 bill he had left would cover everything. And could you heat up the sandwiches? As he waited for his order, Joel glanced through the window at the girl, who still hadn't moved from her position against the wall. Up close, through the fluorescent-lit window, he could see that her clothes, while dirty and wrinkled, had once been expensive. Her jeans bore the subtle logo of a designer brand, and her shoes, though scuffed and worn, were leather and well-made. It struck him as odd that someone who could afford such clothes would be sleeping rough, but he'd learned that appearances could be deceiving, that people ended up on the streets for reasons that often had nothing to do with money. The clerk handed him the coffee and sandwiches in a plastic bag, and Joel paid with his 20, wincing slightly at how little change he received. But as he looked at the girl through the window again, he knew he was making the right choice, even if it meant his own groceries would be a little tighter this week. Walking back outside, Joel approached the girl slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and he was struck by how young she appeared, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion and hunger. Her eyes, a striking green that seemed almost luminous in the harsh light, held a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. "Hey," Joel said softly, crouching down to her level so he wouldn't seem threatening. "I brought you some coffee and food. It's pretty cold out here." The girl stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trick or trap. She'd clearly learned to be suspicious of strangers offering help, which made Joel wonder what kind of experiences had taught her such caution. "I don't have any money," she said finally, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking for any," Joel replied, holding out the coffee. "Just thought you might be hungry." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly, reaching out with trembling hands to accept the coffee. The moment the warm cup touched her fingers, she let out a small sound of relief, wrapping both hands around it as if it were a precious treasure. "Thank you," she whispered, and Joel could hear the genuine gratitude in her voice, the kind of thanks that came from someone who had been ignored and overlooked for far too long. Joel handed her the bag of sandwiches and watched as she opened it with shaking fingers, her eyes widening at the sight of the food inside. She took a small, tentative bite of the first sandwich, then another, slightly larger one, as if she hadn't eaten in days. "What's your name?" Joel asked gently, settling himself on the cold concrete beside her. The girl hesitated, chewing slowly as she considered her answer. "Lily," she said finally, though something in her tone suggested it might not be her real name. "I'm Joel," he replied, not pressing the issue. If she wanted to use a fake name, that was her business. "How long have you been out here, Lily?" She shrugged, taking another bite of the sandwich. "A while. Few weeks maybe. Hard to keep track." Joel felt his heart break a little at her casual tone, and how she spoke about living on the streets as if it were normal, as if it were just another fact of life. He thought about Emma and Marcus, warm and safe at home, and wondered what circumstances had led this girl to be alone and homeless at such a young age. "Do you have family?" he asked carefully. "Someone you could call?" Lily's expression hardened, and she looked away from him, focusing intently on her coffee. "I don't want to talk about that." Joel nodded, understanding that everyone had their reasons for keeping secrets, especially when those secrets involved family. He'd learned during the 2 years since Sarah's death that sometimes the people who were supposed to love and protect you were the ones who hurt you the most. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the occasional car pulling into the gas station and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Joel found himself studying the girl's profile, noting the refined bone structure of her face, the way she held herself despite her circumstances. There was something almost regal about her posture, even as she sat on the dirty ground eating gas station sandwiches. "You don't have to stay out here," Joel said eventually, his voice gentle but earnest. "There are shelters, places that can help you get back on your feet. Lily shook her head immediately, her grip tightening on the coffee cup. I've tried shelters. They're not safe. Not for someone like me. I'm better off on my own. Joel wanted to argue, wanted to convince her that anything was better than sleeping rough in December, but something in her tone warned him off. She'd clearly made this decision based on experience, not naivety, and he respected her judgment even if he didn't understand it. Well, he said, standing up and brushing off his jeans, I can't make you go anywhere you don't want to go. But I've got something in my car that might help you stay warm. Joel walked back to his Honda and opened the trunk, rummaging around until he found what he was looking for. It was an old blanket, one that Sarah had kept in the car for emergencies or impromptu picnics with the kids. It was made of thick wool, forest green with a subtle plaid pattern, and though it had seen better days, it was still warm and soft. He brought it back to Lily, who looked up at him with surprise and something that might have been tears in her eyes. This was my wife's, Joel said, holding out the blanket. She would have wanted you to have it. Lily took the blanket with reverent hands, running her fingers over the soft wool as if she couldn't believe someone was giving her something so precious. I can't take this, she whispered. It was your wife's. She passed away 2 years ago, Joel said softly. And she always believed that things were meant to be shared, especially with people who needed them. Please, take it. It'll keep you warmer than those thin clothes. Lily wrapped the blanket around her shoulders immediately, and Joel could see the relief in her posture as the warmth began to penetrate her chilled body. She looked up at him with those striking green eyes, and for a moment, he saw something there that reminded him of his own children when they looked at him with complete trust and love. Why are you being so nice to me? She asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. You don't even know me. Joel considered his answer carefully, thinking about all the reasons he could give. All the explanations that might make sense to a girl who had clearly learned not to trust kindness from strangers. Because everyone deserves to be treated like they matter, he said finally. And because if my daughter were out here alone, I'd want someone to make sure she was okay. Lily's composure finally cracked at his words, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of emotion, but Joel pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of her privacy. Thank you, she said again, her voice thick with gratitude and something else, something that sounded like hope. Joel reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his business cards, a simple white rectangle with his name and phone number. He worked part-time as a handyman in addition to his cleaning jobs, and though business was slow, he always carried the cards Sarah had insisted he get printed years ago. If you need anything, he said, pressing the card into her hand. Food, help, someone to talk to, anything at all, you call me, okay? Day or night. Lily stared at the card as if it were made of gold, turning it over in her hands and reading Joel's name and number several times. You really mean that? I really mean that, Joel confirmed, surprised by how much he did mean it. There was something about this girl that had gotten under his skin, something that made him want to protect her the way he protected his own children. As Joel walked back to his car, he found himself looking back at Lily several times. She had wrapped the blanket tightly around herself and was holding his business card against her chest, as if it were a lifeline. The image of her sitting there, small and vulnerable but somehow stronger for the kindness she'd been shown, stayed with him as he drove home through the empty streets. The next morning, Joel woke up thinking about the girl at the gas station. As he made breakfast for Emma and Marcus, scrambling eggs and toasting bread while they got ready for school, he found himself wondering if she'd managed to stay warm during the night, if she'd eaten the second sandwich, if she was safe. Dad, you're burning the eggs, Emma pointed out, sliding into her seat at the kitchen table with her backpack slim over one shoulder. Joel blinked and looked down at the pan, realizing he'd been lost in thought while the eggs turned brown around the edges. Sorry, sweetheart. Just thinking about something. Must be something pretty important to make you burn breakfast, Marcus said with a grin, joining his sister at the table. At 12, he had inherited his mother's quick wit and his father's kind heart, though he tried to hide both behind a facade of preteen coolness. Actually, it is important, Joel said, serving the slightly overcooked eggs onto their plates. "I helped someone last night, someone who needed food and warmth. It got me thinking about how lucky we are to have each other, to have a home." Emma studied her father's face with the perceptive eyes of a teenager who had learned to read adult emotions during her mother's illness. "What kind of help?" she asked. Joel told them about meeting Lily, though he kept the details general, not wanting to worry them or betray the girl's privacy. He explained how he'd given her food and his wife's blanket, how she'd seemed so grateful for such simple kindness. "That's what Mom would have done," Emma said softly, and Joel felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's understanding. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, though he tried to sound casual about it. "She always said we should help people when we can." As his children ate their breakfast and gathered their things for school, Joel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah had always been the moral compass of their family, the one who reminded them to look beyond their own struggles and see the needs of others. In helping Lily, he felt like he was honoring his wife's memory and teaching his children the values she had held dear. That evening, after picking up Emma from her part-time job at the local diner and Marcus from basketball practice, Joel found himself driving past the gas station where he'd met Lily. He told himself he was just taking a different route home. But deep down, he knew he was checking to see if she was still there, if she was okay. She was gone. Joel felt a mixture of relief and concern as he looked at the empty space against the wall where she'd been sitting. Relief because he hoped it meant she'd found somewhere warmer to stay. Concern because he didn't know where she'd gone or whether she was safe. He sat in his car for a few minutes, looking around the area to see if she might have moved to a different spot nearby, but there was no sign of her. Over the next few days, Joel found himself thinking about Lily constantly. Every time he passed a homeless person on the street, every time he saw a young person who looked lost or alone, he wondered about her story, about what had brought her to that gas station wall and where she'd gone afterward. He kept his phone close, hoping she might call, but the days passed without any word from her. It was exactly 1 week after their encounter when Joel's quiet morning was shattered by a knock at his front door. He was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and reviewing his work schedule for the day, when the sharp, authoritative sound made him look up in surprise. It was barely 8 in the morning, too early for most visitors, and both Emma and Marcus had already left for school. Joel opened the door to find 2 police officers standing on his small front porch, their expressions serious and professional. The older of the two, a woman with graying hair and kind but tired eyes, held up her badge. "Mr. Martinez? I'm Detective Patricia Walsh, and this is Officer Rodriguez. We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you have a moment." Joel's blood ran cold, his mind immediately jumping to his children. "Is everything okay? Are Emma and Marcus all right?" "Your children are fine," Detective Walsh assured him quickly, clearly recognizing the panic in his voice. "This is about a young woman you may have encountered recently. May we come in?" Joel stepped back, allowing the officers into his modest living room. The space was small but clean, filled with family photos and the comfortable clutter of a home where children lived and played. Detective Walsh's eyes took in the surroundings with the practiced assessment of someone who had learned to read people's lives through their possessions. "Mr. Martinez," she began, settling into the chair Joel offered her while Officer Rodriguez remained standing near the door. "We're looking for a missing person, a young woman named Olivia Blackwood. She's been missing for several weeks, and we have reason to believe you may have had contact with her." The name meant nothing to Joel at first, but then Detective Walsh pulled out a photograph and handed it to him. Joel's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the face staring back at him from the picture. It was Lily, but not as he'd seen her at the gas station. In this photo, she was dressed in expensive clothes, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She was standing next to an older man in an expensive suit, both of them smiling for what appeared to be a formal photograph. "You know her," Detective Walsh observed, noting his reaction. "I know her as Lily," Joel said slowly, still staring at the photograph. "But she looked nothing like this when I met her. She was dirty, hungry, sleeping rough behind a gas station." "When was this?" Officer Rodriguez asked, pulling out a notepad. Joel told them about the encounter, describing how he'd found her at the gas station, given her food and the blanket, and offered his help. The officers listened intently, occasionally asking questions about specific details, time frames, and anything Lily, or rather Olivia, might have said about her plans or her past. "Did she mention her family at all?" Detective Walsh asked. "Her father? Or anything about her life before she was on the streets?" "I asked if she had family she could call," Joel replied. "She said she didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't push. She seemed like she was running from something, or someone." Detective Walsh and Officer Rodriguez exchanged a meaningful look, and Joel sensed there was much more to this story than they were telling him. "Mr. Martinez," Detective Walsh said carefully, "Olivia Blackwood is the daughter of Richard Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Industries. She's been missing for 3 weeks, and her family has been desperate to find her. We've been following leads across 3 states." Joel felt the room spin slightly as the information sank in. Blackwood Industries was one of the largest corporations in the country, a multi-billion-dollar empire that had made headlines for years. He'd given a gas station sandwich and his wife's old blanket to the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in America. "She's not in trouble, is she?" Joel asked, concerned for the girl he'd tried to help. "I mean, she seemed scared, like she was running from something dangerous." "She's not in trouble with the law," Detective Walsh assured him. "But her family is very worried about her safety. A young woman alone on the streets, especially someone from her background, she could be targeted by people who might want to harm her or hold her for ransom." Joel thought about Olivia's, obvious fear when he'd mentioned calling someone, her insistence that shelters weren't safe for someone like her. At the time, he'd thought she meant because she was young and vulnerable. Now he understood she'd been talking about her wealth, her status as a target. "Do you have any idea where she might have gone?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Did she mention any plans, any place she felt safe?" Joel shook his head regretfully. "She was gone the next time I drove by the gas station. I hoped she'd found somewhere warm to stay, but I never heard from her again." Detective Walsh handed him another business card, this one official police department stationery. "If she contacts you, Mr. Martinez, please call me immediately. We're not trying to force her to go home if she doesn't want to, but we need to know she's safe. Her father is beside himself with worry." After the officers left, Joel sat in his living room for a long time, staring at the photograph of Olivia Blackwood. The girl in the picture looked nothing like the frightened, hungry teenager he'd met at the gas station. This Olivia was polished, confident, surrounded by luxury and privilege. But when he looked closely at her eyes in the photo, he could see something there that reminded him of the girl he'd helped. A sadness that expensive clothes and perfect makeup couldn't quite hide. That evening, when Emma and Marcus came home from school, Joel told them about the police visit, about discovering that the girl he'd helped was actually the missing daughter of a billionaire. Both children were amazed by the revelation, though Emma seemed more thoughtful about it than her younger brother. "Do you think she ran away because her family was mean to her?" Emma asked as they sat around the dinner table, picking at leftover pizza Joel had brought home from work. "I don't know, sweetheart," Joel replied honestly. "Rich families can have problems just like everyone else. Money doesn't automatically make people happy or solve their problems. But why would someone with all that money choose to live on the streets?" Marcus wanted to know. She could afford hotels, nice food, anything she wanted. Joel considered his answer carefully, thinking about the fear he'd seen in Olivia's eyes, the way she'd flinched when he'd suggested calling someone for help. "Sometimes people run away from money and privilege because it comes with strings attached," he said finally. Maybe she felt trapped by expectations, or maybe the people around her weren't treating her right. Having money doesn't mean you have freedom, and it definitely doesn't mean you have love. Emma nodded thoughtfully, her expression mature beyond her 16 years. "Like how some of the rich kids at school seem miserable even though they have everything they want." "Exactly like that," Joel confirmed, proud of his daughter's insight. 2 days later, Joel was coming home from his evening cleaning job when he noticed an expensive black sedan parked across the street from his house. The car was clearly out of place in his modest neighborhood, where most residents drove older model cars and pickup trucks. As he pulled into his driveway, The sedan's door opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Joel recognized him immediately from the photograph Detective Walsh had shown him. Richard Blackwood was older than he'd appeared in the picture, his hair silver at the temples, his face lined with stress and worry. But there was no mistaking the strong jawline and penetrating gray eyes that he'd passed on to his daughter. "Mr. Martinez?" Richard Blackwood approached him with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "I'm Richard Blackwood. I believe you met my daughter." Joel nodded, studying the man's face for any sign of the cruelty or coldness that might have driven his daughter to run away. Instead, he saw exhaustion, worry, and something that looked like desperation. "Mr. Blackwood," Joel replied, extending his hand. "I'm sorry about your daughter's disappearance. I wish I could tell you more about where she might be." Richard shook his hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, his eyes searching Joel's face as if trying to read his character. "The police told me what you did for her, how you gave her food, a blanket, your phone number. I wanted to thank you personally." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Joel said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Plenty of people had walked past Olivia without offering help. "No," Richard said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have shown kindness to a stranger without asking for anything in return. You treated my daughter like she mattered, like she was worth caring about, and I'll never forget that." Joel invited Richard inside, offering him coffee while they talked. The billionaire looked around Joel's modest living room with curious eyes, taking in the family photos, the worn but comfortable furniture, the evidence of a life lived without excess, but with love. "Your home is lovely," Richard said, settling into the same chair Detective Walsh had occupied a few days earlier. "It feels like a real family lives here." Joel poured coffee for both of them, noting the wistfulness in the older man's voice. "We do our best. It's not much, but it's ours." "Tell me about that night," Richard said, leaning forward in his chair. "Tell me about Olivia, how she seemed, what she said. I need to understand what drove her away from us." Joel recounted the encounter in detail, describing Olivia's condition, her obvious hunger and cold, her wariness when he'd offered help. He told Richard about her reluctance to discuss family, her insistence that shelters weren't safe for someone like her gratitude for simple kindness. "She seemed scared," Joel said honestly. "Not just of being on the streets, but of something else. Someone else, maybe. When I suggested she call family, she shut down completely." Richard's face crumpled slightly, and Joel could see the pain in the older man's eyes. "I know I wasn't the father she needed," he said quietly. "I was always working, always traveling, always putting business first. Her mother died when Olivia was 12, and I threw myself even deeper into work because I didn't know how to deal with the grief, how to help my cause. Daughter, deal with hers." Joel felt a pang of understanding. He knew what it was like to lose a spouse, to struggle with raising children alone while dealing with your own grief. The difference was that Richard had chosen work over his daughter, while Joel had been forced to take on extra jobs to survive. "But I never hurt her," Richard continued, his voice becoming more urgent. "I never laid a hand on her, never screamed at her. I wasn't there. And I know that's its own kind of hurt." "What happened right before she ran away?" Joel asked gently. Richard ran his hands through his silver hair, his composure cracking. "I was trying to arrange her marriage to the son of another business family. It would have been good for both companies. And I thought it would be good for her too. Security, status, a future planned out. But she fought me on it. Said she wanted to choose her own life, her own love. We had a terrible argument, and I said things I regret." Joel began to understand why Olivia had been so resistant to calling her family, why she'd preferred the dangers of the street to returning home. "What kind of things?" "I told her she was naive, that love was a luxury she couldn't afford as a Blackwood. I said she had responsibilities to the family, to the business, that her feelings didn't matter as much as our legacy." Richard's voice broke slightly. "I sounded just like my own father, who arranged my marriage to Olivia's mother. The difference is, Margaret and I grew to love each other, But Olivia, she deserves better than that. She deserves to find love on her own terms. They sat in silence for a moment, Joel processing this information while Richard struggled with his obvious regret. Finally, Joel spoke. "She talked about looking for something real," he said softly. "When I asked why she was on the streets instead of somewhere safe, she said she was looking for something real. I think she meant real connection, real kindness, real love." Richard looked up at him with surprise. "She said that?" Not in so many words, but it was clear that's what she meant. She'd been surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Money, or status, or connections. When I helped her without knowing who she was, without wanting anything in return, it seemed to mean everything to her. Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup, as if it held answers to questions he'd been asking himself for weeks. "I've hired private investigators, security firms, even contacted the FBI. I've offered rewards, put up billboards, done everything money can buy, but it took a single father working 2 jobs to show my daughter the kindness I should have been giving her all along." "It's not too late," Joel said gently. "If she comes back, if she contacts me, I'll help you reach out to her. But you have to be ready to listen to what she needs, not just what you think is best for her." Richard nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've lost so much time already. I don't want to lose her forever." Before he left, Richard tried to give Joel money, a check that would have covered months of expenses for his family. Joel refused, explaining that he hadn't helped Olivia for any reward, that accepting payment would cheapen the kindness he'd shown. "Then let me help in other ways," Richard insisted. "Your children, their education, college funds, anything you need. If Olivia comes back safely," Joel said, "that will be payment enough." 3 weeks passed without any word from Olivia. Joel went about his routine, working his multiple jobs, taking care of Emma and Marcus, trying not to think too much about the missing girl who had touched his heart so deeply. But he found himself checking his phone constantly, hoping for a call, and driving past the gas station more often than necessary, looking for any sign of her return. It was Emma who first spotted the familiar figure sitting on their front porch steps when they returned from grocery shopping on a cold Saturday morning in January. Joel's heart leaped as he recognized Olivia, though she looked different than she had at the gas station. She was cleaner, her hair washed and pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing clothes that were obviously new but deliberately modest. In her arms, she clutched the green plaid blanket he'd given her, and her eyes lit up with genuine joy when she saw his car pulling into the driveway. "Lily?" Emma asked, recognizing her from her father's description, though she knew the girl's real name by now. "That's her," Joel confirmed, parking the car and getting out with hands that were suddenly shaking with emotion. Olivia stood up as they approached, and Joel could see that she'd gained weight, that the gaunt, hollow look of hunger had left her face. But more than that, there was something different about her posture, her expression. She looked stronger, more confident, like someone who had found what she was looking for. "Joel," she said, and her voice was clear and strong, no longer the hoarse whisper of desperation he remembered. "I hoped you'd be here." "Olivia," he replied, using her real name for the first time. "We've been worried about you. Your father came by, the police, everyone's been looking for you." She nodded solemnly. "I know. I've been staying with a family upstate, working on their farm in exchange for room and board. Good people who didn't know who I was or what I was worth. They just gave me honest work and honest friendship." Joel felt a surge of relief at knowing she'd been safe, that she'd found the kind of genuine connection she'd been seeking. "Are you okay? Really okay?" "I'm better than okay," Olivia said, her green eyes bright with tears of gratitude. "I found what I was looking for, and it started that night when you showed me that kindness doesn't have conditions, that some people help others just because it's the right thing to do." Emma and Marcus had been standing quietly beside their father, but now Emma stepped forward with the curiosity of a teenager who wasn't intimidated by wealth or status. "Are you going back to your family?" she asked directly. Olivia smiled at her honesty. "Yes, but on my terms this time. I've learned that running away doesn't solve problems, it just delays dealing with them. But I also learned what real kindness looks like, what genuine care feels like, and I'm not Crasher. Going to settle for less in my life. She turned back to Joel, still clutching the blanket. This blanket saved my life that night. But more than that, your kindness saved my soul. I want to do something for you, for your family, to show my gratitude. Joel shook his head immediately. You don't owe us anything, Olivia. I'm just glad you're safe. Please, she said, her voice earnest. Let me help. I know you work multiple jobs to support Emma and Marcus. I know money is tight. I have resources now, resources I want to use to help people who showed me genuine kindness when I needed it. Most. What followed was a conversation that would change the trajectory of Joel's family forever. Olivia had returned to her father, but with conditions. She would take an active role in Blackwood Industries, but she would also establish a foundation focused on helping families in need, on providing opportunities for people who just needed a chance to succeed. She wanted Joel to help her run it, to be her partner in creating something meaningful from her wealth and privilege. I don't know anything about running a foundation, Joel protested, overwhelmed by the offer. But you know about kindness, Olivia replied. You know about recognizing need when you see it, about helping without expecting anything in return. That's exactly what this foundation needs. Joel looked at his children, seeing the excitement in their eyes, the hope that maybe their constant financial struggles might finally ease. But more than that, he saw the possibility of honoring Sarah's memory in a way that would have made her proud, using their experiences with hardship to help others facing similar challenges. What would my role be? He asked carefully. Olivia's face lit up with enthusiasm. You'd be the director of family services. You'd identify families who need help, people like yourself who are working hard but still struggling to make ends meet. You'd make sure the foundation's money goes to people who really need it, not just those who know how to work the system. Over the next hour, as they sat in Joel's living room sharing coffee and the sandwiches Emma had made, Olivia outlined her vision. The Blackwood Foundation would focus on helping working families with children, providing everything from emergency financial assistance to educational scholarships, from job training programs to affordable housing initiatives. It would be different from other charitable organizations because it would be run by people who understood struggle firsthand, who could identify genuine need and respond with both compassion and practical solutions. I want to start with your family, Olivia said firmly. College funds for Emma and Marcus, a new car to replace that Honda that's barely running, help with your mortgage. Consider it seed money for the foundation, an investment in the people who will help me make it work. Joel felt tears prick his eyes as he thought about what this could mean for his children's futures. Emma had been working part-time at the diner not because she wanted to, but because she knew the family needed the extra income. Marcus had never complained about wearing second-hand clothes or eating generic cereal. But Joel knew his son noticed when other kids had things he couldn't afford. There's one condition, Joel said finally. Olivia raised an eyebrow, curious. We do this right. We help people who really need it, and we do it with dignity. No publicity stunts, no tax write-offs that are really just ways for rich people to feel good about themselves. We help people the way you needed help that night, quietly and genuinely. Olivia's smile was radiant. Agreed. But there's something else I need to tell you, something about why your kindness meant so much to me. She took a deep breath, her hands still wrapped around the coffee cup Joel had given her. My mother died when I was 12. She was the only person in my life who loved me unconditionally, who saw me as more than just an extension of the Blackwood name. After she died, everyone around me wanted something from me. Friends who were really interested in my money, tutors who were paid to tolerate me, even my father who saw me as a business asset rather than a daughter. Joel felt his heart ache for the girl who had grown up surrounded by wealth but starved for genuine affection. That night at the gas station, when you helped me without knowing who I was, when you gave me your wife's blanket and your phone number, it was the first time in years that someone had shown me kindness without wanting anything in return. You saw a cold, hungry girl, and you helped her. Not because she was rich, not because you could get something from her, but because it was the right thing to do. Emma, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. That's what our mom always taught us. She said kindness was free to give, but priceless to receive. Olivia turned to her with interest. Tell me about your mother. For the next hour, Joel and his children shared stories about Sarah, about her unwavering belief in helping others, her ability to find joy in simple things, her strength during her illness. They told Olivia about Sarah's volunteer work at the community center, her insistence on taking meals to elderly neighbors, her practice of keeping extra sandwiches in her purse for homeless people they might encounter. She sounds like an amazing woman, Olivia said softly. I would have loved to meet her. She would have loved you too, Joel replied. She always said that people who had experienced hardship were often the most generous, that understanding struggle made you more compassionate toward others. As the afternoon wore on, Olivia shared more about her experience on the streets, about the family upstate who had taken her in without questions, about the lessons she'd learned about the difference between charity and genuine care. She talked about her reconciliation with her father, about the difficult conversations they'd had about love and expectations and the difference between supporting someone and controlling them. He's trying, she said. Really trying. He canceled the arranged marriage, apologized for not being the father I needed, and he's learning to listen instead of just talking. It's not perfect, but it's real progress. What about the foundation? Marcus asked, his 12-year-old mind focused on the practical aspects. When would it start? Olivia grinned at his directness. As soon as Joel says yes. I've already had lawyers drawing up the paperwork, and my father has agreed to provide the initial funding. We could be operational within a month. Joel looked around his living room, at the family photos on the mantel, at the worn furniture that had seen his children grow up, at the evidence of a life lived with love, if not luxury. He thought about Sarah and what she would have wanted him to do, about the opportunity to help other families avoid the struggles his had faced. Yes, he said simply. Yes, I'll help you. The transformation that followed was remarkable in its speed and scope. Within 3 weeks, the Blackwood Foundation was officially established, with Joel as Director of Family Services and Olivia as President. They rented a small office space in Joel's neighborhood, deliberately choosing a location that would be accessible to the families they wanted to help, rather than impressive to potential donors. Joel's first official act was to hire Mrs. Rodriguez, a widow from his church who had been struggling to make ends meet on her Social Security. She became the foundation's intake coordinator, using her natural empathy and life experience to identify families who needed help and connect them with appropriate resources. The foundation's first beneficiaries were families Joel already knew from his community, people who had been quietly struggling while maintaining their dignity. There was Maria Santos, a single mother of 3 who cleaned offices at night while studying for her nursing degree during the day. The foundation paid for her remaining tuition and provided childcare support so she could complete her program. There was James Washington, a veteran who had been living in his car while working 2 minimum wage jobs, trying to save enough for an apartment deposit. The foundation helped him secure housing and connected him with job training programs that utilized his military experience. Each family was helped quietly, with no fanfare or publicity. Joel and Olivia would visit them personally, sitting in their living rooms or at their kitchen tables, listening to their stories and understanding their specific needs. They provided not just financial assistance, but emotional support, treating each family with the same dignity and respect they would want for themselves. Emma and Marcus became unofficial junior ambassadors for the foundation, helping to identify classmates who might need assistance and volunteering at foundation events. Emma used her experience working at the diner to help organize job fairs for unemployed parents, while Marcus started a tutoring program for younger children whose parents were working multiple jobs. 6 months after the foundation's launch, Joel was sitting in his new office, reviewing applications for their scholarship program when Olivia knocked on his door. She had changed since their first meeting at the gas station, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose in life. I have something to show you, she said, placing a newspaper on his desk. The headline read, Local Foundation Quietly Transforms Lives. And the article detailed the Blackwood Foundation's work without sensationalizing it. It focused on the families they'd helped, the practical solutions they'd provided, and the sustainable changes they'd made in people's, quote, lives. "This is exactly what we wanted," Joel said, reading the article with satisfaction. "Recognition for the work without making it about us." "There's more," Olivia said, her eyes bright with excitement. "3 other cities have reached out wanting to replicate our model. They want to start their own family-focused foundations using our approach." Joel felt a surge of pride and amazement at how far they'd come from that cold night at the gas station. "Sarah would have loved this," he said softly. "I think she would have," Olivia agreed. "And I think she would have been proud of you for taking the risk, for believing that kindness could grow into something bigger." As Joel drove home that evening, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. A simple act of kindness, offering food and a blanket to a homeless girl, had grown into something that was changing lives across multiple communities. The foundation had helped dozens of families, but more than that, it had created a model for how wealth could be used responsibly, how privilege could be transformed into genuine service. At home, Emma was at the kitchen table working on her college applications, her future now secure thanks to the scholarship fund the foundation had established. Marcus was building a model airplane, a hobby he'd developed since the family's financial stress had eased, and he'd had more time to just be a kid. The house felt different now, not because it was bigger or fancier, but because the constant worry about money had been lifted, allowing them to focus on the things that really mattered. "How was work today, Dad?" Emma asked, looking up from her laptop. "Good," Joel replied, settling into his chair at the table. "Really good. We helped a family today whose father had been injured at work and couldn't afford physical therapy. The foundation is covering his treatment and providing temporary income support while he recovers." "That's awesome," Marcus said, not looking up from his model but clearly listening. "I bet he felt like we did when Olivia first helped us." Joel smiled at his son's insight. "I think he did. There's something special about knowing that someone cares enough to help, especially when you're not expecting it." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Joel sat on his front porch, thinking about the changes in his life. The same stars that had shone down on him during those difficult months after Sarah's death were still there, but everything else had transformed. He still missed his wife terribly, but he no longer felt the crushing weight of trying to provide for his children on his own. More importantly, he felt like he was living a life that would have made Sarah proud, using their experiences with hardship to help others facing similar challenges. His phone buzzed with a text message from Olivia. "Thank you for saying yes to the foundation. Thank you for showing me what real kindness looks like. Thank you for helping me find my purpose." Joel typed back, "Thank you for trusting me with your vision. Thank you for turning one act of kindness into something that's changing lives. Sarah would have loved seeing what we've built together." A year later, the Blackwood Foundation had expanded to 5 cities and helped over 200 families. Joel had been featured in a national magazine as one of the country's most innovative social entrepreneurs, though he always insisted that the credit belonged to the families who had trusted the foundation with their stories, and to Olivia for having the vision to turn her privilege into service. The foundation had evolved beyond just providing financial assistance. They had started a mentorship program that paired successful professionals with struggling parents, a job training initiative that helped people develop marketable skills, and a community garden project that provided fresh food while teaching valuable life skills. Each program grew out of the specific needs they encountered in the families they served, ensuring that their help was practical and sustainable. Joel's favorite part of the work was still the home visits, the chance to sit with families and hear their stories, to understand their dreams and challenges. He had learned that poverty wasn't just about money, it was about isolation, about feeling invisible and unheard. The foundation's greatest success wasn't in the checks they wrote, but in the relationships they built, the way they helped people feel seen and valued. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Olivia visited Joel's family for dinner. She had become like an older sister to Emma and Marcus, someone who remembered birthdays and school events, who offered advice and encouragement. The relationship between Olivia and Joel had evolved too, from benefactor and recipient to true partners in their shared mission. "I've been thinking about that night at the gas station," Olivia said as they sat around the dinner table, sharing Emma's homemade lasagna. About how different things could have been if you hadn't stopped to help. Someone else would have helped you eventually, Joel said, though they all knew that wasn't necessarily true. Maybe, Olivia replied. But it wouldn't have been the same. You helped me because you saw someone who needed kindness, not because you knew who I was or what I could offer you. That made all the difference. Emma, now 17 and preparing for college, had grown into a thoughtful young woman who understood the complexities of the world around her. I think Mom would have said that kindness is like planting seeds. You don't know what will grow from them, but you plant them anyway because it's the right thing to do. Your mother was a wise woman, Olivia said softly. I wish I could have met her. She's still here, Marcus said matter-of-factly, now 13 and more willing to express his emotions. Every time we help someone, every time we choose kindness over indifference, she's still here. Joel felt tears prick his eyes at his son's words, at the depth of understanding in his young voice. Sarah was still there. In the values she'd taught them, in the legacy of compassion she'd left behind, in the foundation that had grown from the seeds of kindness she'd planted in her family. After dinner, as they sat in the living room sharing stories and laughter, Joel realized that this was what he'd been searching for during those dark months after Sarah's death. Not financial security, though that was important, but purpose. The chance to use his experiences, both the struggles and the joys, to make a difference in other people's lives. The green plaid blanket that had started it all now hung in the Foundation's office, a reminder of how small acts of kindness could grow into something transformative. Families who visited the Foundation would often ask about it, and Joel would tell them the story of how a simple gesture on a cold night had changed multiple lives. It's not about the money, he would explain to new families. It's about seeing each other's humanity, about recognizing that we're all struggling with something, and choosing to help anyway. As the evening wound down and Olivia prepared to leave, she pulled Joel aside for a private conversation. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice excited but nervous. I'm getting married. Joel's face broke into a wide grin. That's wonderful. Who's the lucky guy? His name is David Chin. He's a teacher at the school where we started the tutoring program. He has no idea about my family's money, he just knows me as the woman who volunteers there twice a week. He loves me for who I am, not what I have. Joel felt a surge of happiness for the young woman who had become like family to him. Does he know about your background? I told him last week. He was shocked, of course, but what he said was perfect. He said it explained why I was so passionate about helping others, but it didn't change how he felt about me. He loves the person I am, not the person I was born to be. That's exactly what you were looking for, Joel said, remembering their conversations about finding real love. I'm so happy for you. I want you to walk me down the aisle, Olivia said, tears in her eyes. My father and I have a good relationship now, but you're the one who helped me become the person I am today. You're the one who showed me what genuine care looks like. Joel felt overwhelmed by the honor she was offering him. I would be proud to walk you down the aisle. The wedding, held 6 months later, was a perfect reflection of the person Olivia had become. Instead of a lavish ceremony in a 5-star hotel, she chose a small church in the community where the Foundation was located. Instead of expensive flowers and decorations, the church was decorated with artwork created by children from the Foundation's after-school program. Instead of a registry at expensive stores, guests were asked to donate to the Foundation or to volunteer their time. Joel walked Olivia down the aisle wearing the same suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, but this time it represented joy rather than sorrow, hope rather than despair. As he placed Olivia's hand in David's, he saw the love in both their faces, the kind of genuine connection that Olivia had been searching for when she'd run away from her privileged life. The reception was held in the Foundation's community center, with food provided by local restaurants that had partnered with the Foundation's job training program. Families who had been helped by the Foundation mixed with business leaders and community activists, creating exactly the kind of inclusive celebration that represented the Foundation's values. During his speech, Joel talked about the night he'd met Olivia, about the journey that had brought them all together, about the power of kindness to transform lives in ways that were impossible to predict. Sarah used to say that we never know how our actions will ripple out into the world, he said, raising his glass. When I stopped to help a cold, hungry girl at a gas station, I never imagined it would lead to this, to a foundation that's helped hundreds of families, to friendships that feel like family, to a wedding that celebrates the kind of love that sees past surface differences, to the heart of who someone really is. As the evening wound down, Joel found himself standing outside the community center, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed his lowest moments and now his highest joys. Emma and Marcus were inside, dancing with friends and celebrating with the community that had embraced their family. Olivia and David were surrounded by well-wishers, their faces glowing with happiness. Joel thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, about the choices that had led him from despair to purpose, from isolation to community. He thought about Sarah and how proud she would have been of the man he'd become, of the children he'd raised, of the life he'd built from the ashes of his grief. The foundation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined, but its success wasn't measured in dollars or headlines. It was measured in the families who had been helped, in the children who now had opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise, in the community that had been built around the simple principle that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and kindness. As Joel walked back inside to rejoin the celebration, he carried with him the certainty that this was just the beginning. The foundation would continue to grow, continue to help families, continue to prove that kindness could indeed change the world, one person at a time. And somewhere in the stars above, he liked to think Sarah was smiling, knowing that the love she'd planted in her family had grown into something beautiful and lasting. The story of the single dad who gave a blanket to a homeless girl had become something much larger than either of them could have imagined that cold night at the gas station. It had become a testament to the power of human kindness, a proof that genuine care could bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle, and create connections that lasted a lifetime. In the end, Joel realized, that was what life was really about. Not the money you accumulated or the status you achieved, but the lives you touched, the kindness you shared, and the love you gave freely to others. The blanket he'd given Olivia that night had kept her warm for a few hours, but the kindness behind it had warmed both their lives forever, creating a legacy that would continue to spread long after they were gone. The Foundation's motto, printed on a simple plaque in the lobby, captured the essence of their mission. Kindness costs nothing but can change everything. It was a lesson Joel had learned from his wife, shared with a stranger, and watched grow into something that was transforming lives across multiple communities. As he looked around the room at the faces of people who had become family, at the children who were dancing and laughing without worry about their next meal or their family's next rent payment, Joel knew that Sarah's legacy was canteen, secure. Love, kindness, and compassion had indeed changed everything, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of humanity could create the biggest miracles. The night he'd met Olivia at the gas station, Joel had been a struggling single father working multiple jobs to support his children. Now, he was the director of a foundation that was changing lives, the father of 2 children who were thriving, and the surrogate father to a young woman who had found her purpose in serving others. The transformation had been remarkable, but the principles that had guided it were simple. See people's humanity, respond with kindness, and trust that love could indeed conquer all. In the months and years that followed, Joel would often tell the story of that night to families who came to the foundation for help. He would explain how one act of kindness had grown into something neither he nor Olivia could have imagined, how choosing compassion over indifference had created ripples that were still spreading outward, touching lives they would never know about. The story became a source of hope for families facing their own struggles, a reminder that their current circumstances didn't define their future possibilities. That kindness could indeed come from unexpected places and lead to unimaginable transformations. It was a story that proved Sarah's favorite saying, that we never know how our actions will ripple out into the world, but we can choose to make those ripples ones of love, kindness, and hope. And in the end, that choice, that simple decision to help the stranger in need, had indeed changed everything.